Hello everyone, Brennan from Plumblebee here. Today we're going to be talking about plumbing fittings. This is very basic, very bare bones. Just the basic fittings that you need to know if you're just getting started off in the trade, you're a new plumber's apprentice, or you're a DIYer or homeowner and you're just wanting general knowledge about plumbing. This is where you should start. PVC is one of the most, most commonly used for drain, waste, and vent. So you need to get yourself very familiar with these fittings. And we're not even going to scratch the surface on, as far as however many fittings there are out there, we're not even going to come close. But at least with these basic ones, you're going to get a better understanding or a general understanding of what these fittings are. Maybe not exactly what they're used for today because this video would be extremely long. And I might touch on a few things here and there, but I plan on making, multiple videos kind of describing what each fitting can do, the different orientations that they can be put in. Some of them can be put in certain orientations, some of them can't. But again, we won't get into that. That's a little bit more advanced. But for today, again, just pretty bare bones. So we'll get started with these fittings. All right, let's get into it, guys. Again, we're demonstrating PVC only today, in particular 2-inch PVC. Doesn't really matter the size, but what does matter is that all the fittings that we're using today, all the basic fittings that you should get to know, are what's called DWV fittings, or drain, waste, and vent only fittings. So these fittings are not for pressure, they're for drain, waste, and vent. Now, obviously, before we get into anything else, I just want to mention that this isn't the only way that you can run plumbing in. You can use cast iron, you can use steel piping, you can use copper, you can use brass. There's so many different types of fittings out there, and they all have different use cases. But for now, we're just doing DWV PVC fittings. So we're going to start with the coupling. So coupling, coupler, you're just conjoining or joining two pieces of pipe together, basically. Some people may say this is only used if you make a mistake. However, that's not really true, but this is what it is, simply a coupling or a coupler, PVC. Next one up is called a cap. It's just a cap. Some people might refer to this particular cap as a permacap. The reason being, obviously, is if you want to cut a line or terminate a line, you want to permanently cap it. That's what this would be used for. So this is what's called a permacap. Now, there's a bunch of different caps out there, which we won't get into, but this is a permacap. Other caps can be used for testing and stuff like that, which this can also be used for testing as well. But mainly, you're going to use it to just permanently cap a line. So this is a PVC cap or a permacap. Next one up is a 90. Now, most of you might know this, obviously, as a 90. Some people, maybe older plumbers, would call this an elbow or a quarter bend. Why do they call it a quarter bend? Well, at the end of the video, I'll actually tell you why some of these fittings are called what they're called. And they all have to do with, a number and then a bend. So quarter bend, and then we'll get into other fittings here in a minute. But you would some people would call this, a quarter bend or an elbow or a 90. So you need to know some of these things because, just like I'd mentioned earlier, if you're new to plumbing, you don't know anything about plumbing, you're just trying to learn, you want to know what some of these fittings are called and why they're called it. So if somebody's going to ask you to go grab an elbow, you want to know that this is what they're referring to. Or a quarter bend, which we'll get into that here in a little bit. So this is a 90 elbow quarter bend, most commonly called just a PVC 90. Now, here's another 90. But what's the difference? Well, you can clearly see what the difference is. It's these hubs right here on the bottom. So this, as you can see, will accept a piece of pipe. But they've made this a street 90. So this street 90, now it can be used for certain specific reasons, but the reason you would have what's called a street 90 is so you can insert this end into another fitting without having to cut a piece of pipe to put in between each hub, right? So without having to cut a piece of pipe to put in between each one of these hubs, you have what's called a street 90, and you can use it like this and roll these 90s or whatever orientation you want to put it in. So this would be called a street 90, which is really the only difference between these two. So next on the order would be a 45. So just as simple as the 90, you know, the 90 was a 90-degree bend. This is, or a right angle bend. This is a 45. So this is on a 45 degree, right? And just like the 90, it also has a street fitting. Now, again, there's so many different fittings out there, and there's a lot of other fittings that have, you know, a street counterpart, and we may not get into those today. But both of these are 45s, except one of them is just a street. And again, you'll just put it in another piece of pipe. Doesn't have to be, or another fitting. It doesn't have to be a 45, but we won't get into that today either. So our next fitting that we have on the list is what's called a 22 or a 16th bend. And also, I forgot a quick note. We'll go back to the 45 real quick. So just like the 90 I said was called a quarter bend, some people refer to this as an eighth bend. So just keep note of that. I'm sure you're starting to see a pattern. So 90 is a quarter bend, 45 is an eighth bend. So this would be called a 16th bend or a 22. Now, it's a little bit, there's an added layer to this. This isn't called a 22, like this isn't actually 22 degrees. Like this is 45 degrees, the 90 is 90 degrees. This is called a 22 because a lot of people refer to that as a 22. They don't say, give me a 22.5 degree fitting. They usually say 22 or 16th bend. Now, it is 22.5 degrees, obviously, which is half of 45. And you know, 45 is half of 90. So you're seeing the pattern here. So this would be called a 22, just so you know, if somebody calls it out and you need to go get this fitting. This would be called a 22, a 16th bend, or technically it's a 22.5 degree fitting. And just like both of the other fittings, it also has a street. So, same thing here. Now you're combining these two together, and again, I'm sure you're seeing this pattern as well. You're combining these two 16th bends, or 22.5 degrees, which gives you what? 45. So, you can combine these fittings together and any other fittings to create whatever angle you want, right? So, well, not necessarily, but pretty much. So, well, I guess technically, yes, you could. So the next fitting we're going to get into would be what's called a Y. Now, why is it called a Y? Well, it's kind of obvious, right? Well, it's not actually spelled with just the letter Y. It's spelled W-Y-E. And basically, this fitting is for joining two lines into a horizontal run where water and the waste can basically flow in the same direction, right? So you got water or waste coming in, water or waste coming in. So this would be called a Y. Now, we're going to leave this on the table real quick. And you can add a 45 or an eighth bend to this right here, in particular a street. And now you got what's called a combination, or a sanitary combo, or combination Y. So this creates another 45 degrees. Since this is already on a 45, you're putting another 45 on it, and this is creating this as a flat run, right? Because this is turning this into a 90-degree angle. So this fitting right here actually comes as one piece, and you would refer to that fitting as a combo. But this right here is just a Y with an 1/8 bend, or a Y with a 45, making it a combo or a sanitary combo. So here's your Y, and then a combo, right? So actually, we'll leave this here because the next fitting's pretty similar. So this fitting right here is referred to as a sanitary tee. So there are some similarities here. However, I mentioned earlier that only like certain fittings can go in certain orientations. So you can put this fitting in certain ways that you cannot put this fitting and vice versa, right? So, but it is very similar. I'm sure you can see the similarities. So we'll get rid of this fitting. So sanitary tee, right? This particular fitting is a 2 by 1.5 inch sanitary tee. Now, this is important. So when somebody calls out, let's say you're a new plumber, right? And they say, hey, go grab me a sanitary tee. Go grab me a 2 by 1.5 inch sanitary tee. Well, this is what you'd be looking at, right? Because it's 2 inches by 1.5 inches. This inlet right here is 1.5 inches in size. And this right here, the top and bottom, are both 2 inch. Now, if somebody were to say, hey, go grab me a 2 by 1.5 inch sanitary tee, well then, you're always going to be called this fitting out from the bottom of the fitting, right? This is the bottom of the fitting. This is the inlet. This is the top. So if somebody said, get me a 2 by 1.5 inch sanitary tee, or 2 by 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch sanitary tee, it would be, you always start here at the bottom, 2 inches. And if they said 2 by 1.5 inch, it's 2 by 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch. So a 2 by 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch sanitary tee. So that's just a little side note there, because these tees obviously come in different sizes, and the inlet can be different than the top and or bottom, right? So this is a sanitary tee. So that was the last basic fitting that we have that we're going to cover today. Now, I did mention earlier that I would tell you why some of these fittings are called what they're called. In particular, this 90, let's say, is called a quarter bend. So now this is a street 90. Here we have, a regular 90, but they're both still 90 degrees. So the reason why this is called a quarter bend, and why some plumbers might refer to this as a quarter bend, is because it is 1/4 of 360 degrees. So 90 is 1/4 of 360, right? So if you were to put 4 of these together, you would have what? You'd have a circle, right? You'd have 360 degrees. So same thing with the 45s. This is an 1/8 bend, so you would need 8 of these instead of 4 like the 90. You're just doubling it, right? You're seeing the pattern. You need 8 of these to make a circle. Same thing with the 16th bend. You'd need 16 of these, doubling it again, to make a full circle. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative. I hope it was educational. If you do like the video, just leave a like, maybe leave a comment, make some suggestions or anything like that. It'd be greatly appreciated. I'll see you guys on the next one.